As a Python developer, you've probably found yourself needing to generate web pages at some point in your life. Instead of learning everything that front-end developers need to know, wouldn't it be nice if we could just write Python code that automagically generates all the front-end logic for us? Well, that's exactly what FastHTML is designed to do. It is designed to generate HTML and CSS so we can focus on writing Python. In this video, we're going to be learning two things. One, what is FastHTML and why we should use it. And then two, we will dive into code and build a contact book project from scratch. If you're new to the channel, I'm Eric Roby, a software engineer with over a decade of experience, and I have helped thousands of developers learn and grow within their craft. So FastHTML is a Python library designed to build simple dashboards to scalable applications in minutes. It provides a declarative way to create HTML elements that allows you to build web pages using Python quickly. And that's really cool. FastHTML provides access to HTTP, HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and really allows you to be able to push your project to have no limits. FastHTML was inspired by the development of FastAPI. So you'll see a bunch of similarities to that if you're familiar with FastAPI. But FastHTML was built on top of Python, Starlight, Unicorn, and HTMX. I think the best way to really learn about FastHTML is to see what it can do by playing with it and developing something in action. So let's dive into code and let's build this contact book project. All right, so I already have a main.py file created that is completely empty with a virtual environment. Now, the very first thing we need to do to install FastHTML is to go ahead and say pip install python-fasthtml. Now, this will download literally every single dependency you need to get started with FastHTML. And it's very similar to like FastAPI. It's going to come with Unicorn, but it's also going to come with a couple of dependencies like Python multipart, which comes with forms. It's going to come with SQLite automatically, so we can implement with a database from the get-go. It's going to come with a lot of things already out of the box. Now, to get started, the very first thing we need to do is just import FastHTML, and we can do this from the commons. So we can say from fasthtml.common import star. All right, and then once you do that, we now need to initialize the FastHTML app. So we can say app and router equals our fast app. All right, and just like that, we have all the imports we need to get started. All right, now the very first thing that we need to do is create a router. And we can do this by saying @RT. So it's going to be a little bit different than like FastAPI when you say @RT, and then inside here, we can say what we want the router to be. So we can just say /, so rt/. Now we need to create a get response. So we can say def get, and that's all we need. This will tell FastHTML that, hey, we are creating a get request. Now inside here, let's go ahead and just say we just want to return an h1 tag. We'd want to say return and then just say h1. And then inside here, we get to print what we want to be printed through an h1 tag. So now inside here, let's go ahead and just run it, see what happens. It's going to be the same command that we do for like FastAPI, where it's going to be unicorn::app -- reload. And when you do this, it's going to start up our FastHTML application. Let's switch over into a web browser. And if we refresh it, we can see that it says hello world. If we right click and inspect, we can see that it's going to be inside an h1 tag. So pretty cool stuff. Now, if we wanted to change it, we could say like h2 tag or h3, and it's going to go all the way to h6 tags. And if we went ahead and just said h6 tag and we refreshed, we can see that it's going to be a lot smaller here. Now, one thing to take note, each time we do this, we have to refresh the page. This is not happening automatically, right? The hot reload. And if we just want to get right to the point of how to start with hot reload, we need to come up to our fast app and just say live equals true. This instantiates and initializes fast reload from the start. Real quick, if you've enjoyed the video, please subscribe to be notified of upcoming videos. And check out my best-selling FastAPI course linked below. All right, so let's make this a little bit smaller so our browser fits. I'm going to close this and just make that a little bit smaller right there, just so we can see it happening. All right, and I'm actually going to make it a little bit bigger. All right, so now if we want to go ahead and just do some more things inside here, we could just remove this and say, hey, we want to create a div tag. And inside the div tag, we could say we want to create an h1 tag, and we could say a whole bunch of different. So I'm just going to let that autocomplete. I'm using a IDE called Cursor, which is just trying to predict the next code thing that I type, kind of like GitHub Copilot. But what we can see here is it comes automatically with 6 different H6 tags. That's what I was trying to demonstrate in the beginning. And we can implement different things. So we can come in here and we can say, hey, we want this to be a P tag. And inside the P tag, we can say this is a paragraph. And if we see it, it's going to hot reload and it's going to say, hello world, this is a paragraph, all inside a div. Now we can also use something called title, and it's going to create a title, but it's also going to be implementing a container. Now this container is from Pico or Pico CSS, but it's kind of like Bootstrap where it just pushes in all the edges. So what we can say here is in front of the div, we can say titled, and we can say open parenthesis, what we want it to be. So we can say FastHTML, that's perfect. And then at the very bottom, we need to close that new parenthesis that we just opened up. So we can see FastHTML, hello world, this is a paragraph, but now we added the CSS containers around each of the items. And it's all because it's sitting inside this title, and the div is actually inside that. So it's all coming from inside here where we have now a CSS container class implemented. Now let's make it a little bit more advanced. So we have this titled FastHTML. Let's go ahead and just say contact book because that's what we're going to be building. And then inside the div, we can say hello world, this is a paragraph. But now let's go ahead and create a new button. And this button I'm going to say is click me, but the on click is going to be an alert that says hello world. And now we can see that the container implements that as well. And if we say click me, we get a pop-up that says hello world from our local host. This is awesome, awesome stuff. Now, one thing that we also should be implementing inside here is serve. Now, serve at the very end, this is going to be able to initialize our FastHTML application. So by default, we should just be implementing this because it runs the app in an async server with live reload set as default. Now it's going to be doing everything we were doing before, but it's going to be doing it automatically just because we're starting with this at serve. All right, so let's make this even more advanced. Let's say we want to implement contacts now inside our application. So inside our Git, I'm going to create a contacts list and I'm just going to paste it over. It's going to be a little bit quicker. But what we're doing here is we are essentially just saying, hey, we are adding a list of contacts and we just have 6 different contacts right here. Let's scroll down and see where we're returning our contact book with our div. Let's remove this hello world h1 tag and let's instead replace it with a unordered list. And you can do that just by saying UL. And inside here, we just want to go ahead and just print our contacts. And what we can see here is this is going to print our contacts based on what we have currently available. But what we can see immediately is that it's not actually printing anything. And that's because we need to return some kind of item that can consume these list of items. So what we can do to do this is we can say, hey, we want to create a new items, which equals an unordered list where inside we want to use an asterisk, which means like get all the elements out of it. And then we can say for the list, we want to then say O of our name for all of the contacts. So now if we go ahead and replace contacts with items, we'll be able to get all of the items' first name and last names of the contacts in a unordered list. Now, instead of just having this button sit here, it would probably be better if this sat inside a form of some type. Before we do that, let's go ahead and just change this paragraph to an H2 tag, and we're going to say add a new contact. Now, let's go ahead and just remove this button, and let's go ahead and create a form. And inside the form, we want to create an input that's going to have name equals name, but then we can say placeholder is also equal to name. We then want to go ahead and say another input with name email, placeholder email, with a add button. So we can see that we have our contact book with all of these names, and then we can add a new contact right here, and we have our form and a button already ready to go. And I'm going to name this add contact. And just like that, that's how we have all of these contacts in our contacts books loaded and ready to be used. Now, I bet it would be pretty nice if instead of us having this fake contacts list that is just objects sitting inside a memory list, for us to actually have a real life database attached to our application. And we can do this super easily here using FastHTML. So right here, we have our app and our router. We can go ahead and say comma contacts and then comma contact. This is now going to be our database, and these are going to be like the table inside. So we have our database and then our table. And for FastHTML to know that, hey, we are doing this, we need to just go ahead and say what our database name is going to be. So we can call it contacts.db. Live is going to remain true. And now we need to go ahead and specify the items inside. So I'm just going to do this just to make it a little bit cleaner and easier to read. But what else we need to do is go ahead and say ID of type int, name equals string, email equals string, and then our primary key is going to be our ID. And that's it. Now, if we go ahead and run our application, we are going to instantiate a SQLite database with these values. And then we're going to do the same thing, but for Jane Doe right after. And now let's come down here where we talk about our contacts. Let's go ahead and remove all of our fake contacts. And here, let's go ahead and say create contacts. Now, this is just a way for us to say, hey, if our database is empty, we want to create a new element. We want to create a new 2 records. And now we want to do is say items is equal to just a list. So we can remove this and say it's going to be a list of O. And we don't necessarily need that anymore either. For O in contacts. Let's run our application and see if it works. And boom, there we go. We have 2 items. These are going to be the string values of the object. So it's going to show us the ID, name, and email. So it's going to be Jane and John Doe that we created. But you might be thinking, well, do we really want to be printing the entire object? Or would we much rather just be able to print the data that we need? Well, luckily, FastHTML comes with a way to do this pretty easily, and it's called render. So right above our fast app, because we need to stick it in here eventually. But what we can do here is go ahead and say def render with our contact. And we just want to return a list here. So we need to return a list, but we need to say an F string of our contact.name and our contact.email. Perfect. And now what we want to do is right under our live, we just need to say render equals render. We just need to tell our FastHTML application about that. And then, but before we get started, I want to create a new function, which just create contacts. So it's going to create these contacts so our application just isn't empty. So let's go ahead and create a new function called def create contacts. If the length of contacts is equal to 0, well, then we want to say contacts.insert a new contact with the name equals John Doe and the email is john.doe@example.com. And then we can delete our items. Cool, so now we just have our first name and our email for all of the elements inside our contact book. Now, the next thing that we want to do is be able to add items to our contact book. And we can do this by filling out a new API endpoint of a post that accepts a new contact, and then we can add it to our list. So to do this, we need to go down here and say, hey, we are going to create a new def, but this is going to be a post function, right? Because we are passing in a HTTP post and we name it whatever it is. And we can say that the route is just going to be an empty slash, just like the last route. And what we want to do here is say we want to pass in a contact of contact. We want our contacts.insert our contact, and then we want to return our contact. Perfect. Now, the next thing that we need to do is somehow tell this button that when we submit it and we call this post endpoint, that we are going to get this contact, but then we need to append it to the other contacts that we currently have already getting rendered. And what we can do here is just assign an ID to our unordered list. So then when we say, hey, after we get an item from our button, we can append it to whatever we have an ID to. So here, I'm just going to go ahead and say comma ID equals contacts list. And now what we need to do is use some HTMX right here, where we got to say inside our button that we want to use HX post, which is going to be the route of our API endpoint. So we can just say slash. Our target ID is going to be that contacts list that we just created. And then we need to use our HTMX swap, which is going to be before end. So what we can see is that the target ID is going to be the ID that we are referencing in our unordered list. So I'm just going to come up here and refresh, and I can say my name is Eric Roby, and it's going to be coding with roby@gmail.com. If we say add to contacts, we can see that it was added right here. Now, what we want to do is say, hey, when we add a new item, we want the old contact form to be completely removed and go back to the blank state. And the blank state is this original name and placeholder. Now, what you can do in HTMX and what you can do in FastHTML is create these new input forms and just replace them once they're complete. So let's go ahead and say def reset name input, where we're going to say return input with the ID this time equal name, placeholder equals name, and then we want to use the HTMX swap OOB to be true. And then let's go ahead and just copy and paste this for email. So every time we said name, let's go ahead and just replace this for email. And then let's go ahead and grab this reset name input and the reset email input, and let's just swap them right here with the original input that we had. Now, the last thing we need to do is right here, we don't want to just return the contact. we want to return both the reset name input and the reset email input. So now if we go ahead and we say we want to create a new name, so we can say Milo Roby, which is my dog, and we want to say like mr@example.com, and we say add contact, we can see that's going to be added and the form is going to be completely reset. Now, the last thing that we're going to go over is how to delete elements. Let's go ahead and just say we wanted to create a new API endpoint. So just like we did before, we're going to say at the router, and we are just going to call this / and then we want to implement our ID so we know what ID we're going to be deleting. We can then go ahead and say def delete. We're going to pass an ID of int, and then we just want to go ahead and delete the contacts.delete ID. That's all we want to do. We don't need to return anything. Now, all we need to do is come up here where we have this list inside our render. Let's go ahead and just create a way for us to be able to delete something. So we're going to be right here. Let's go ahead and create an A tag that says delete with an HX delete, which is going to be / our contact ID. We then want to say HX swap our outer HTML. We want our target ID to be contact - our contact ID. And that's going to be the end of this A tag. And then outside of this A tag, so still in the list, we want to create an ID for the list because that's what we're going to be enhancing. To now just be contact ID. And I had too many parentheses there. So right here, let's add a comma. There we go. And now we can see that each item has delete next to them. If we add a new item, so I'm going to say, I'm on the spot, MV, and the email is going to be mv@example.com. And we say add contact. We can see it got added. And then if we want to delete Milo, we can see that got deleted. I got deleted. And there we have it. We're able to add items and then delete them all using FastHTML, which uses HTMX under the hood, along with a bunch of other extremely popular libraries and frameworks. And I will see you in the next video.